Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Video Game Master channel. You got me, VGH, once again with another meme-worthy deck video. Now, this one is on Stunfisk, and it's attacking partner Gliscor. Stunfisk has an ability. Its ability is that whenever he gets attacked or takes any amount of damage while having a attached pool card, the Pokemon that attacked Stunfisk takes 5 damage counters worth of damage. So even if he's knocked out or if he just takes damage, the opposing Pokemon will take 5 damage counters. This pairs very well with the Pokemon tool Vengeful Punch, which states that when this attached to gets knocked out, they take 4 damage counters. Stunfisk himself has only one move, which allows you, for 1 fighting energy, which allows you to lock your opponent in. It does 30 damage, but your opponent is unable to switch next turn. This means the only outs that they can have is using switch cards such as Switch, Escape Rope, and other cards of that nature. If, in most cases, an opponent's deck doesn't run a switch card, that Pokemon is now locked into the active spot until it is taken out, and or Stunfisk cannot use its attack for 1 turn. Which, if, again, like I stated before, he does get knocked out, it will do 9 damage counters to the attacking Pokemon. This works exceptionally well when you're up against evolution-based decks. A lot of the decks in the format that use evolution use rare candy in order to evolve, but most of the Pokemon have less than 90 HP when they evolve. So taking those 9 damage counters along with pairing up with the other tool, Devolution TM, it allows you to devolve your opponent's Pokemon, thus taking 3 knockouts on your opponent's Pokemon just for them attacking you. The deck also has a stall aspect where you can still use Radiant Alakazam to move damage counters off of the active Pokemon and take out Pokemon on the bench by moving the damage counters that the 30 damaging move that Stunfisk uses by moving those damage counters onto the bench. And finally, Gliscor, who has a wonderful coin flip effect. 2 fighting energies, flip 4 coins. For each coin that lands on heads, you do 50 damage. But if you land 2 or more heads, you also paralyze your opponent. And if you guys don't know what paralysis already does, it stops your opponent from retreating, and it stops your opponent from making an attack for 1 turn. It's a very stall-heavy deck. It's a very mean deck to play. I will admit that this deck does take a little bit of being used to. You can even tell in the video where I have to still learn the deck, because I built it and it worked immediately. I wasn't even fully aware of how powerful the deck really was until I actually started using it. It's very fun, and I can only imagine what the people on the other side were feeling when playing against something like this. Let's get into the video and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So like I said, we were very early in the playtesting of this deck. I honestly will say that it probably can still be more refined. You guys will see the deck list that I had when I was playing these matches in the description below in case you want to try and test it out yourself and probably refine it, maybe make it a little bit faster, maybe find a better attacking partner. But I found this was pretty good in and of itself. Our first turn having Skwovet wasn't a great play in my opinion, but you guys can see that there are a lot of pieces to the deck. There's Skwovet Bibarel, which allows us to have a very strong and very powerful draw engine. The Stunfisk is our main setup that we can use to lock our opponent in place, and we also have our Gliscor, who's another huge attacker that can possibly give us extra turns and do some big damage. My opponent, as you can see, just from the Pidgey and the Rotom alone, in this format, you know that this is a Charizard player, which, for the deck that we built, was perfect. To unsuspecting players that use Charizard, we actually hide 2 De-Evolution TMs in the deck. Mainly just due to the factor of being a little sneaky. It works against high-level players who usually believe there's only 1 TM De-Evolution that anyone would actually run as a tech card. But with our deck that puts a lot of damage counters all over the place, we just set up all of the Pokemon on the board to be knocked out with a Devolution, and we can get some free wins off of that. Along with, obviously, we have a lot of hand disruption. Ionos and Judges are both put in the deck in order to make sure that our opponent has a weird time trying to get a solid hand put together. Especially with Rotom Charizard, who, if they don't have a possible setup, they just use Rotom in order to draw out their whole deck. You saw right there, my opponent actually could not find a Charmander fast enough, so he had to actually use Pidgeot, and I assumed the card that he searched out was a Charmander, so that way he can start setting himself up. Our board doesn't look super great, but the fun part about this is, if you actually look, we have Skwovet, and we have Skwovet for 40 turns, it felt like. I don't know how many turns. It was like 7, 8, maybe even 9 turns where we actually couldn't do a lot with the Skwovet. So we're trying to go through our deck, find out what we can get. Since that Arven that hit us removed 2 of our big pieces, we really needed to set ourselves up. So we needed Super Rod, got our Alakazam back in the deck so we can start moving those damage counters around if we can get it back. But every turn with Skwovet just being on the bench, since our opponent could not remove it, and Charizard is not one of those decks that runs something that can hit the bench, we just consistently will set up with a Skwovet draw, look at it, go, that's cool, put it at the bottom of our deck and draw a second card until we find something that's going to be useful. Our opponent is now trying to figure out what's going on. I'm 100% sure, because I will be using the attack Rumble with Stunfisk, which will lock our opponent in place. As you guys can see, he tried to use Boss's Orders to try and get out of this situation, but we couldn't let it rock that way. I believe I was going to be using Path to the Peak here that we are running in the deck because we really did want to stop him from using abilities with that Pidgeot, but we also couldn't let it slide in case we found something better, so we used Skwovet, found an energy, got a retreat, and Stunfisk is back at punching this Rotom in the face. Luckily, Rotom is actually weak to fighting, so we actually put up a solid amount of damage just locking our opponent in play. But of course, like I said, the Rotom is locked in place. Now, a lot of people are running only 7 energies or 8 energies in Charizard, which, since we already knew that information, once our opponent put down all of these energies on the board, we were pretty sure that we were good to go on this. He only has 7 here. We were sure he only had 7 and or maybe 8. So if we kept these energies on the board, we knew that he had no way of easily retreating his Pokemon without just getting knocked out. So we got a very lucky hit here with the Radiant Alakazam, and we couldn't let it go. And in order to not knock out his Pokemon, we decided to start moving some damage counters off of the Rotom in order to keep it on the board for more turns, in order to also weaken the Pidgey. We might need one of those prize cards a little bit later, so we wanted to try and clean up the weaker Pokemon. And, or if he wanted to try and remove the Pidgey, he would be forced to do it sooner rather than later, just so he can remove that value. So I see the Forest Sealstone, so I assume that he has Entei in his deck because of the Forest Sealstone. Or maybe he just forgot to put it on Rotom and he didn't want to use it. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe he just whiffed it. So we luckily did get a reset and we were able to get our Boss's Orders back in the deck. Boss's Orders is so important. And our opponent is trying to get us to knock something out. So we see this Charmeleon here, but we're just going to do our best to try and just keep the Charmeleon in play rather than try and deal with the Rotom here and just do damage. Unfortunately, Charmeleon Flame Veil, which I still believe shouldn't have been printed, does actually block the ability that Stunfisk uses because it's the effect of an attack, which Flame Veil blocks. So in which case, when I normally would have locked it in place, I couldn't. But we also, like I said before, we looked at the board, we knew full fact that our opponent was unable to move anymore because he didn't have any more energies. We take a knockout freely with our Alakazam to try and find something, and unfortunately, we get nothing but an extra card we can toss back into the deck. My opponent every turn is using Pidgeot EX in order to set some things up. I'm not so sure what the Manaphy was entirely for. I don't know if he searched that out with Pidgeot or something, but there it is. We finally wait 6 turns, 7 turns. I should have kept count. And finally found a Bibarel to start setting ourselves up for more things. And I know I'm running, I think, 2 switch cards in my deck, so I decided to not try and set up a Radiant Alakazam with an energy in order to switch out. We're just going to try and remove the Charmeleon. Now, like I said, we were still learning the deck, and halfway through I realized that removing Charmeleon will not work, because then he brings up the Charizard, and we're going to have an issue with that since we won't be able to knock out the Charizard very easily. So we pivot our options and start moving away from this. And I think my opponent made a soft mistake here. I think he wanted me to knock out the Charmeleon, so he gave me the Stunfisk to try and force that knockout sooner rather than later. Realizing what he was trying for, I didn't want to give it to him. So we start setting up the remove the Charizard option, because we know this Charizard has a Charmander under it, and I believe that Charmander had 60 HP. I do check it. So I believe that it had 60 HP, which when we start setting it up, we're able to weaken it, hit that devolve. Yeah, I just checked it right there. Hit that devolve and then take a knockout on it. So my opponent is realizing he is now stuck. We're setting up our Rotom back up into the active because, again, it's going to get locked. It can't evolve into Charizard, so we don't have to worry about Charizard coming out in case he does have another one that's ready to go. And we can also just start using that setup for Rumble, do big damage, move those damage counters off, and just continuously do enough. Rotom, obviously, at the end of it, will get knocked out if he doesn't find a switch card, which with Pidgeot, he had many turns to find and just never did. So it was a good feeling. We also had Town Store, so we knew full well we were able to get rid of that Path to the Peak, which is what we wanted to do in order to set up the Alakazam to move more damage. And now that we know that the Charmander underneath that Charizard has 60 HP, and we did show our opponent, hey, we have Devolve, we're able to just push this damage and start taking on knockouts. We checked the other Charizard, we checked the Pidgeot, so that way we're able to see how much HP they all have, so we can start moving more damage counters around in order to make it just a little bit better for me to remove these Pokemon when Devolve hits. We try and make a decision on what we want to do. We don't want to, since we already lost our Town Store, we don't want to lose our Devo in our hand. And we find the second one that was prized. So now we have two. Our opponent knows of one, but doesn't know of the second one. Our opponent also makes the mistake of moving up one of the Charizards that had no damage counters on it. And I go, wait, we win right here, don't we? We use Radiant Alakazam and we just devolve and win. Forgot that Charmeleon had Flame Veil, even though I literally said it 30 seconds before I did that. So I was only able to take 2 knockouts. But also knowing that all of his fire energies were locked, he didn't have another Charizard as of this point, we were totally fine. Or so we thought. And my opponent finds the Arven he's looking for, gets the Super Rod, hits Super Rod for fire energy and Charizard to come back, for 3 fire energies, and then just happens to have said Charizard. Which we could have avoided all of this by literally just moving 1 damage counter off of one of the Charizards, or even off that Pidgey, and moving it over to the Charmeleon, so that way it would have just gotten knocked out, and then we hit Devolve and won the game anyway. Luckily, never punished, we go off and go, you know what? We're good. We'll just set up Path, we'll just set up an attack because we can, and no matter what happens, so long as we have the energy in hand, we're good to go. We're still setting up our hand, so we just set ourselves up so, you know, if my opponent puts in a bad Mon, we have Switch, we have an Energy, and we have Devolve all in our hand. We go for the Paralysis, and with 4 coins, I was very sad. Because we needed a little bit of damage just to get that knockout, so we push in our Stunfisk. Our Stunfisk is ready to go. We're so far behind, we're so far ahead at this point, it didn't matter, because we only needed 1 damage. So that way when we hit the Devolve, it would have went back to a Charmeleon and the game would have ended anyway. So if he takes out our Stunfisk, he does more damage to himself. It doesn't matter which Pokemon he does it on, it would get knocked out. Even if Manaphy somehow managed to knock out Stunfisk, it would put 9 damage counters on Manaphy and take a knockout. Puts 9 damage counters on Pidgeot V, or EX, sorry. We still would have gotten 9 damage counters on it, devolved, and still won. It didn't matter which Pokemon went up, as long as we had an Energy and a Devo, which we did have an Energy with Gliscor. Devo was ready, and we just slapped the Devo, this time devolving and actually knocking out the Charmeleon to take our final prize. With decks like that, a double Devo is very jarring. They always think they're safe because once the Devo goes off, they're like, okay, he can't get it back, we're good to go, we can keep playing this out and win the game. Second Devo takes him out because they don't understand about the extra damage that we're putting all over the place. Then again, I will admit, I did make a small misplay. But like I said, the deck was still so new. I legitimately think I played 3 games with this. Like the first one, I was like testing a deck profile, changed it, went right back in with 2 more games, and we just went off with this. It felt so good. And we're now into our second game. Look, my opponent starts Spiritomb. Not great. Not great start. But then we find out Nest Ball just, you know. Nest Ball does Nest Ball things with a Miraidon list. Oh, and also, take heed of the timer above me up there. I did cut out most of this game. I tried to anyway, as much as I could. Because my opponent does stuff like this. And this is a double sped up. So, my opponent spent 1 full minute throwing Nest Ball at the board. I was determined to win this. My opponent hits the Nest Ball, goes Miraidon. Miraidon goes Raikou and Zapdos. He wants to put up that damage. I'm not sure why he picked Zapdos, because as you can see, my deck was my board was very full of Pokemon with a lot of HP. And apparently he just didn't respect his hand enough, starts going off to try and get that Spiritomb out of the active, and I suppose try and get that free draw Raikou and start setting a few things up, and just forgets that Spiritomb locks basic V Pokemon abilities, so he gets very confused as to what's going on, and continues to want to set up the rest of his board. So he's throwing away a bunch of cards, sets up UEX so he can have a draw engine, Nest Balls again, gets Mareep, and throwing the view down. There it is. Now he's able to set up Restart, so now he's got a pretty solid setup board. Not enough energy, he did not find any of his electric generators, which is pretty nice on me. And now I have to try and make my own decisions here, because obviously not the greatest of feelings. We did get to go first, so we have to make some pretty bad plays, or pretty bad decisions to try and get our Bidoof Bibarel set up. And we have Skwovet already, which is great, so our draw engine is completely set up, and Arven allows us to start setting up some of the other things for later game stuff, like EXP share, and there we go. Vengeful Punch for Stunfisk, get that free escape rope, and we need to have at least one card in our hand for Skwovet to work, so we just keep the EXP share because it did not matter. We didn't want to put the second one down, and again, we wait for our opponent to make a decision. Now remember, every single time you guys see a wait, I try and cut out as much time as I can so you guys don't have to live through that. But you can see the difference in our time. I've played 2 minutes, my opponent's almost played 4 minutes, and we've only gotten like turn 2. Something that I should mention with this standard format of decks, we did run into enough issues with the resistance. Turns out a lot of Pokemon have a fighting type resistance, and its resistance is -30, so we're doing 0 damage with Stunfisk. Realistically, the 0 damage with Stunfisk does come into play a lot, because obviously if we lock our opponent in and they can't attack, the 30 damage with Stunfisk, even if it does 0, makes our opponent have to draw a card and pass over and over and over again. And like I said, with this deck list, it doesn't make a difference whether you attack quickly or you attack slowly. You're able to stall your opponent out, make them draw, and whiff cards. As you saw right there, I did use my counter catcher, because this deck does tend to fall behind a little bit sometimes, in order to completely set up a MUEX to the active. The reason we set the MUEX to the active is so that we can stall for more turns. Path to the Peak stops MUEX from using its ability, along with Raikou and Miraidon. Even though Spiritomb is stopping Raikou, don't really need to worry about Raikou all that much, but regardless, if he's able to remove the Spiritomb, Path to the Peak is a good blocker. He's Ultra Balling out to get Flaffy, but Flaffy will do very little in this matchup. Granted, we don't want to let him attack in the first place. And all of his electric Pokemon I swing on for weakness, so our little 30 damage Rumble turns to 60 damage, which if they are unable to attack, that 60 damage is a lot. Finally, he hits a generator, tries to choose, boop, boop. Hits both, just like every other electric player. Hits an Arven for more cards, finally gets that switch card, so he's able to get out of the active. Problem with that being is, obviously, like I said, the more times they use switch cards, the easier it is for us in order to lock them into play. Get that second energy out on the Gligar, and we go, all right, we got Skwovet, Bibarel, we can't let either one of them go down, and we don't have a switch, so we're just going to start working on, well, we do have a switch, sorry. We don't want to waste our switch, so we just try and go in with this. We go, hard to say what we want to do here, but we kind of need the 5 cards to hopefully look for everything else we need. We finally get our Alakazam, very, very important we get this Alakazam here, as you'll see in a moment, and we get the Ultra Ball that allows us Gliscor. Now, Gliscor, like I said before, 2 heads, and we get to Paralyze, and even better, they're weak to fighting, so it does 200 damage instead of 100, perfectly keeping it in the active spot and paralyzing it. And because of the Alakazam that we have, we're able to actually move 2 damage counters off that Raikou V in order to take out the Miraidon. He has to put something else into the active, and we'll still get to attack to try and go for another paralysis, which is crazy decent. Luckily, that coin flip was in our favor. Even if we didn't get 2, like specifically 2 there, it was almost guaranteed that we would not be having a good time right now. The Miraidon obviously was able to attack or retreat even into Raikou in order to get Raikou to attack and still knock out Gliscor no matter what. and we did not have our full setup for a backup yet. So we got really lucky on the 2 coin flips, but the paralysis is what makes it so good, which is why it's just incredible. Last game you saw, it can sometimes whiff. 0 out of 4 coins. I feel like that doesn't happen that often, but on TTCGL, it does. Like I said before, we just move the damage counters over with our Alakazam, and luckily we off of our prizes, we hit Stunfisk and an energy. So we're able to set up our secondary Stunfisk in case he is able to take out the Gliscor. Moving through, we're just checking on Super Rod hits, so we decide to ruin our opponent's hand, get everything else we want. Just another Stunfisk, another Vengeful Punch, nice Path to the Peak. We've already used the ability this turn, so we didn't really want to use Path to the Peak as of yet to move damage counters around. We're checking all of our outs to see if it's worth using, and to make the decision, let's stop him from using Miraidon and what's it called, Mew, in order to set things up. So we lock this Spiritomb into play because we don't do any damage to it due to resistance. But again, Spiritomb doesn't do that much damage, so we're just gonna leave it as is. And he does something that we don't really expect to see here by making Spiritomb attack. Now, without looking, does anyone know what Spiritomb does when it attacks? No, because no one has ever used Spiritomb's attack before. It actually goes back to your hand, and all cards attached to it. So, my opponent found a weird way out of this loop where I lock him into play, because with 12 cards remaining, I could just sit here until the end of time and use Stunfisk to rumble for 0 and consistently keep my opponent in the active position without being able to do anything. He sticks a double turbo on it, goes fade out, and gets it back to his hand, which I was completely thrown off because, again, I have never seen someone attack with Spiritomb before. He does get a free switch out into his Raikou because he wants to start doing some big damage. Now, again, Raikou, though, does still have the weakness of fighting, and we have to make some pretty tough decisions here. We can't really do anything in forcing our opponent to get out of the active with Counter Catcher or such, because obviously, as you see, we're tied up. But putting up that 60 damage, locking the Raikou in place is totally fine by us, because if we take that loss, Stunfisk will still trigger, putting 9 damage counters on Raikou, which is huge based upon how much HP he has left, and our wonderful Radiant Alakazam. Obviously, Path is still in our way, but we have so few cards in our deck, and we still have an out to Path to the Peak with our other Stadium card in our deck. Our Custom Trap triggers, our Vengeful Punch triggers, and he's down to 30 HP. And we have a Gliscor. And now we're losing. So this is very easy for us to go into a couple more setup plays, like Raihan, like Arven, like Counter Catcher, because we don't really need to deal with that Raikou yet. He needs 3 damage and he gets knocked out, and we have a Radiant Alakazam. So we want to set up outs to everything else. We got our Raihan to give us a free card from our deck, like Pal Pad, and the reason we go with Pal Pad is because we run 2 Boss's Orders, which are both in the discard pile. Those Boss's Orders are our key to victory, but we just have to find them. With Bidoof Bibarel in play, that is not difficult until we whiff, and we again go for our Hurricane Shock, and we hit 2 coin flips. So look what happens. Again, we hit 200 damage. Miraidon, having 220 HP, again survives, but still gets paralyzed. And we already know that we've removed every switch card from their deck. We already know that he has no ways of removing Miraidon from the active, and we are in a good position. Even if he takes out Gliscor, by some means, his the Alakazam is able to move move damage around, and we're just going to be able to remove that Raikou or remove the Miraidon very easily for the other 4 prizes that we need. He did play Lost Vacuum there, and I was so excited that he was going to remove Path to the Peak, and I was like, this is going to be good, we're going to be great, nothing can go wrong, and he somehow gets around it again. He chooses something else, and I was like, oh, that's a little unfortunate. So instead of trying to do anything fancy, we just decided to go in with the attack, because we cannot move the damage counters from Radiant Alakazam's lock with Path to the Peak. We just remove the Pokemon, and the last Pokemon we want to try and remove is that Raikou V, but he needs to take 3 prizes in order to do that. So, what's his play, you know? He tries to use Iono, puts himself to 3, puts me to 2. I, again, have that setup where I can lock my opponent out. He tries to Hurricane Shock me and only gets 1 coin flip from 4, so I don't get paralyzed, but my opponent has gotten paralyzed 2 times this game from this guy. Pretty good feeling. Now, even all 4 coin flips on Hurricane Shock from Gliscor only will do 170 damage due to that 30 damage resistance. But again, 2 coin flips, Paralyze, and we hit 3. Paralyze 3 times, but when my opponent used my own attack against me, fails the paralysis. He has a lot of cards to shuffle his hand back into his deck. I'm not so sure exactly what he's looking for, but you can see the count in our cards being different, and we also know that we have another Boss's Orders in our deck. If we really, really wanted to, we can easily just bring up the Iron Hands there, or even Flaffy. Anything we wanted to, we could bring it to the active and take it out pretty easily with our Stunfisk with the Counter Punch. Say Zapdos takes 30 damage, doubles because of weakness, and then if he attacks me, he goes down. Same thing with Flaffy. We can take single prizes, but we have all these different tools and all these different ways to win the game. We can stall it out. He has 6 cards left. We have plenty. Since we were able to finally get to our Town Store, we were able to remove the Path to the Peak and move 1 damage counter. The reason we do that is because we're setting up our Raikou for 2 damage counters in order to win the game, or we hit 2 coin flips to also win the game, which we just hit the double coin flips, which again would stun our opponent and make them have a bad time. So it was really fun just stunning our opponent. And I don't know if you guys saw the timer at the end of that game. Let me just try and bring it back just a little bit here and hit play. Move the damage counters over, and you can see right there, it was at 7 minutes after everything that happened. Bring it up, there it is. 7 minutes and 30 seconds to my 14 minutes. So he was used a lot more time on this, and I had to cut this down from the 30 minute game, whatever it was, to like a sizable amount of time. So that way I can make this video not painful for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Let me go over here. Whee! So that is our Stunfisk Gliscor list. It's a lot of fun to play, but I admit that it does take a lot of times for those games to play out. It's very stall heavy. It is very fun to think about what your opponent is thinking on the other side. The reason why these games take so long is because your opponent is trying to formulate a way to get out of the situation they're in. A lot of games, your opponent may just concede because they don't want to try and figure it out, rather than trying to play the game out. But when they do play the game out, you're just like, I know you're having a bad time because you're losing to a Stunfisk. I don't know about you guys, but if you ever get enraged by finding some tier F deck and you just actually end up losing to it because it's got a solid strategy that you just never thought was going to be seen, hit me up in the comments below. Tell me what decks you guys have ever run into where you've had this issue before. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. We make some very solid meme content with the Pokemon decks that we go with. We try and get a video at least once a week, usually between Thursday and Sunday. So I hope you guys stick around for that. We do a lot of fun decks. If you guys want to have even more content, we stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday starting at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And our wonderful tournament that we love being a part of is the Redacted Paradox Tournament starting 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. It's a big invitational, big event, and we give away tons of codes during our events. So I hope you guys can come by. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Good night, everybody.